Hello, we're back. Next task on our stool is to cut the dovetail socket under the top, and then to also cut the dovetail itself right there so that it'll fit in that socket. I went ahead and I cut one of them. Kind of work out any problems and anything like that. This board, and if you remember, is slightly bowed, and it's easily, you can straighten it out with clamps and stuff or pressure. It'll flatten right out. So what I'll do is, in the process of cutting the dovetails in this, is we'll clamp it to the bench and make sure that that flattens out, cut the dovetail, and take the clamps off. Same way when we install it and slide it into the dovetail socket, that the clamps will be on this and holding it flat. And then when we let the clamps out, it'll kind of bind in that socket all by itself. So, okay. First off, cut the socket. Now, I went ahead and to help guide my saw in cutting across the grain, I went ahead and cut at 14 degrees, which is our angle here that we originally laid out the dovetails and everything. I cut a long block at 14 degrees, full length. It's straight across, and also straight across the bottom where it'll mate up with the board. What we end up doing is to cut this angled sidewall, and I'll show you here as I do it step by step. We'll clamp that right across there, and then we get a giant miter saw. The miter saws are usually used, I think this is about 26-27 inches long, but miter saws are generally used in miter boxes or a type of frame with guides and stuff that allows you to cut angles. I've got one over there that the miter frame and everything, I think, is from 1908, and I think it's an old Stanley, even though it's not marked. And this comes out of that. However, we can also use this to cut that wide board. Because of the stiff back and the long blade, and then coupled with this guide block, we should be able to cut the sidewalls pretty decently with it. So, we'll use that. Morning.
On top of getting that water in.
Yeah, it is. I guess you'll have to cut that one out.
I can make a blooper at the end of it, it's fine.
That's the mailman.
That's our mailman.
He's talking about our canoes over here. So, I already took and knifed those lines in earlier. You know, take the marking knife and keep going back in those same grooves and scoring it and making it deeper. And then what we'll do is take a chisel, go in, and kind of knock a Y, so to speak, in one side and knock a Y in the other. And that'll make a nice place for the saw to ride in. And then put our block up to one side, clamp it down, and then saw. That little trench will keep the saw from jumping out, hopefully, and screwing up the shoulder on that cut. So, next step will be to take and make our trenches and use a wide, large chisel to make those trenches with. Alright, I've got two different kinds of chisels here. One's a great big framing chisel. This is about 1.5 inches wide. Just use a wider chisel because that covers a larger area. It's been sharpened and stropped within 1 inch of its life, but this is an old one. This chisel itself is probably over 100 years old right now. It was made by Ohio Tool Company. The second one, I believe, is a Matheson. It's a paring chisel. And paring chisels are defined because they're really flexible in the cut, and then this has got a cranked handle. This handle allows me to drop that chisel off into the bottom of the groove and to be able to work out all the waste and stuff that's in the bottom of that. So these are the two chisels that we'll be using, along with a good mallet. So those fibers back and forth and break them out. Now, because you knifed your line earlier, that shouldn't splinter back. And as long as you don't go under the depth of the knife line that you marked, you should be okay. This should break out. Of course, in some cases, the chisel might dive a little deeper. Now, I don't know if you can see this or not, but within those two knife lines that I marked, I got a trench on one side. And it's not very wide, it's probably only about 1/8 inch wide, the little trench that I just made. We'll go ahead and knock the trench against the knife line on the other side and leave this waste here in the middle. You want to kind of leave that in the middle because that's what our jig's going to be balancing on. If you were to go in and start knocking down the middle half with your other chisel, then this will want to dive off, and this changes the angle then of your jig. So you leave this waste right here in the middle between the two trenches. What I'm doing is going back and cleaning up the actual knife line itself, dropping the chisel back in that knife line and just pushing with hand pressure and making a slice, so to speak. You can go back and use your marking knife and slice back along that wall to help clean out some of the crap that's kind of hanging in there. have here, I don't know if you can see, these are two little trenches. I've just excavated that out. Our knife line was over here, and we cut in with the chisel on that side and cut back in. Same way with the other trench. Now that'll give us a place for the big saw to ride in. Okay? Let me flip this thing around here so that hopefully you can see what's going on. At least do it with the one cut. Okay. Change the camera angles here. And this is our two trenches that we made. Got them overhanging the bench slightly. Now if you can see in here, but there is little knife lines that angle down to create a dovetail socket. Now we need to set the saw up and the jig so that it reflects that angle as we cut and are able to cut across. So this is where our trenches will kind of help us. I first need to get this jig sort of set in place, and then I'll drop the saw in and then readjust as we need it. Leave them clamps loose, snug but loose. And don't worry about the divots on the other side right now. And we take and we drop that saw in the groove. And again, don't think my holdfast's holding fast. There it is. So we drop it in the groove. Right there, the teeth are inside of the groove. Now if we get the saw balanced just so on there, we can lay it up against our board or our jig over here, and then we can judge, because if it's in and the saw's up against the other side of the trench, if the jig's over too far, your saw will look like that. If it's in too close, it'll push the top out like that. We need that saw to lay right up against the board, just like that. Okay. So we sight down along there, make sure the gap looks good. Also want to make sure that the outside edge of those teeth are up against the bottom of that cut. Alright, looks good still. There, and then I think we can clamp her down tight. You want to make sure it's pretty tight too. You don't want that board to scoot or move. Alright, now to help that slide along, we slide right along that, right there about where the block would be at. That in there. Make one back cut. And then start forward. Very carefully, because we got two different places we need to aim at. We've got a gauge mark right there, which defines the bottom of that groove. We also got one over here on this side. Find it. I can't find it, of course. You'll have to keep checking your saw in reference to those marks so that you know where to stop at least on the outside. Now often what happens when you're using this saw is that the outside gets marked on both sides, and it sort of leaves a hump in the middle. And then you have to sort of balance the saw on the hump to try to take the stuff out of the middle of the board. It's usually what ends up happening. So, alright, make sure she's in there, she's up against her block. Start the cutting. Here, little. It's a lot of stopping and checking, but I think it creates a nice sidewall. See, we're starting to come up here to this side, but we also got to keep in mind that one back there. So we can tilt the saw back and forth as we see fit until we hit our lines. Now you know, like I mentioned, that there's going to be a high spot in the center of that trench as a result. Out there on that one. Got a little ways going. Yeah, about there. Now, very carefully, kind of go through, see if we can take out some of that high spot without cutting into either end. Better stop there with that. Take out a big saw, lay it aside. Now, these little rulers are not expensive. I think you can still buy them at about any big box store. Make sure it's got a little stop on it. These things are handy for so many things, and one, that the thinness is able to get into all kinds of places that you normally wouldn't be able to do with a thicker ruler. So, and then the stop is handy for, you know, general gauging. I wouldn't want to do fine machine work with that stop, but it gets you an idea. What we'll do is we'll move that stop up and use this to help clean out any of the dust and dirt that's in there. That way we get a fair reading. Leave your gauge block right there, because you'll be guaranteed to have to clean the slot out somewhere. We don't need a measurement, a number measurement. We just need to move that stop up, get us an idea of how deep it is on the edges, and then to gauge it back and forth. So that is gauged. We go to the middle. See there? It's a high spot right there in the middle, because the gauge stop is up probably about 1/8 to 1/16 of an inch. We go to the far end. It might stand to do a little work out there too. Let's try one more time. It's all right. But of course we got a high spot in the middle. So here's what we'll do. Now that we know that, we'll take a smaller saw. And so I'll use my old crosscut Diston, very old one. We'll drop it in there up against the gauge But then what we will not do is engage the full blade. We just want to engage the tip, so to speak. So you angle it up like that, keep it at this angle, and drag it between, we know these spots are pretty decent. We need this spot drug out, or sawed out a little bit more, so that it closer matches the other two. And it doesn't take much, but what it'll do is it'll probably rip more than it actually cuts. So we lay it up against there, and just run that back and forth. You can kind of hear and see some of the crap that it's bringing up there in the middle. Take our marking gauge again, slide the stop all the way up, drag that in there and get some of that crap out of there. You want the crap out of there, that way when you drop your ruler in there, that if there's a chip or something that's in there that isn't going to sit up on that and give you a false reading. Okay, bring our stop back down, get our mark. It's actually not too awful bad right there. So we'll go with that. Anything else can get cleaned up with the router plane when we go to cut the other side of that groove. And then we'll go in and waste away there. So, okay. Alright. Well, before we waste out some stuff here, I'll just very briefly talk about mallets. I generally like using a round mallet. This is a fairly lightweight. I think this is a 12-ounce mallet. It's probably a little heavier than that, I think. But it's got a polyurethane head on it, so it doesn't damage chisels or anything else like that. I do not use this for the backs of the holdfasts because it really tears up stuff. I generally use a joiner's mallet for that, and as I've been using it a while, you can see what it does to the face of it. Now also with bigger chisels, sometimes you need a little heavier work. This is an antique mallet. As you can see, the beautiful turnings that are in there, and it was also used, as you can see around there too, the different places. I believe that is boxwood, boxwood or boxwood burl, and I have used this too, and this is a good deal heavier, got a nice little longer handle on it. The reason I like using round mallets is that way you don't have to focus up here on the end, but you could then focus down here. As if you was to use one with a head like that, you have to focus both down here and up here as you're striking to make sure that you hit it. I know probably in time you would get used to where you're striking at, and it would become second nature, and then you can completely focus down there. But I always end up at some point missing and hitting my hand. I almost never get that with this. Reason for the round head is you can hit that, and it doesn't matter what face it's on because the face goes all the way around it. So that allows you to completely focus on the tip and what you're working on. So those are my mallets. You don't have to be too precise with this. This is just wasting out material. And this is done with the bevel end down. You could probably do it anyway with the bevel end up. And then across there, it shouldn't really take too long. This will also get that down in there far enough so that when you use your paring chisel to zip out that material, it doesn't go skidding out and across your work. And I've done that before. That's really quite irksome. There were some choice curse words used that day. Alright, now we get our paring chisel, and this is what they call the cranked paring chisel. This is a very old one. I think I said earlier it was Matheson. It's actually Marples from Sheffield, England. So that means that's a really good chisel. But the paring chisel is a very steep bevel to it, and then it's a very thin blade, and usually a long blade, and is really quite flexible. You can flex a good bit with it. So, and that's kind of the point of it. That allows you to get in this case, be able to get in here and go all the way from one end to the other, and not hit your knuckles. You can do real fine paring work with it. In that you can, because of the steep bevel, you can come back in here and go across the grain and bring up edges like that. So it's got several uses. It'd be handy to have a paring chisel. This is narrow enough, and I got it for this reason, that it would fit into a 3/4 inch groove and get right down into the bottom of the groove, hence the cranked handle and all. So now we'll try to zip out some of this material, and we'll get it down here a little closer to our base line, where we'll then be able to use a router and finish leveling off everything right into the bottom. So, and all of this is just wasting away material. There's a heck of a knot right there, so we'll take some finer cuts. Working up the line. Got a really big knot right there. You can see this is part of it. This is the outside part as it comes across, and so I'm trying to get in there and sort of pare that out, because it ain't zipping out of there like the rest of it. The reason some of this ain't flying out of there because of the wedge shape of the hole, the stuff here in the bottom is bigger, so it ain't able to fly out. If that were a full dado where it was squared completely off, then the chips would probably just fly right out of there. There we go. Goes right to the end now. Alright, we're close there. Close there. I can also see here on the side we're getting close to the bottom of our saw cuts too, so that's a good indication as to stop right there. Clean out some of the crap, the frayed stuff on the edges. Now, we get a router. No, not that router. We get the hand tool equivalent, the 19th century equivalent of Norm Abrams' router. This has no plug on it like Norm's, but sort of kind of does the same job. It routes out material that's in the bottom of the groove. Sometimes when you read Civil War stuff, you'll hear that somebody, a general, somebody say, "We routed the enemy. We chased them out of the trenches and out of the woods." Well, this is what this does. This routes out material. It scares it right out of the groove, so to speak. What this is it's a plane that bridges, will bridge grooves and things, dados, and drops in an iron. Drops that iron in there, and then it excavates out the bottom of the groove. And so with this, you can get right up to and finish the bottom of a groove. All this work here for now was preparatory for this. This is all rough work right now. Now this here will finish up the bottom of the groove decent enough for you to be able to put another board in there, hopefully, and slide it in right. This also has a set depth. You can set that depth any way you want by this gizmo right here. This moves it up and down, and this locks the blade in. So I want to, first off, go and make sure that the depth is the same as the other one. It should be, but I just want to make sure. So we look at our thing there, I think it is. Loosen that up and we bring it up a bit. We bring it up till that just kisses the material that's in there already. You lock it back down every time. I got a problem here. I want to move this out of the way. Woo! Jumped right up there. We go along and we run it right along there. First, we're just taking off the very high spots. That'll kind of give us an idea of the depth. And then we go back and readjust. Make a couple more passes, go back, readjust. And every time, the bottom of that groove gets deeper and deeper and deeper. Alright, that's pretty good. Pretty good. Yeah. Let me take more material. when you get out here, if you're pushing out this way, can have a tendency to blow out that edge. So what we want to do is approach it from the other side, at least on this side, come back this way. So hopefully it saves most of that edge. But I also have that knot there that I need to come back in the opposite direction to see if that helps any or not. See, every pass makes that just a little bit smoother. So loosen her up, drop her down a little lower, tighten her thing back down. Should be starting to get close to our desired depth. Alright. I'm almost to the bottom of both to the stop and almost to the line. So you keep double checking your gauge marks. Even though this is set according to my gauge, and I set that according also to the marks to make sure that they are the same on the board, I still want to keep an eye on this stuff because things can get loose as you're moving along. There's a lot of vibration there and things get loose and things move. Stops that are built into this might move up or down as I go down. So, and you can overshoot marks quite easily that way. So it's just a good idea that as you're going along to double check against your gauge marks. Your gauge mark that you just put on there is you're working to that line. So that's the absolute rule, despite what even this gauge says. So I need to keep watching this with that as I go along to make sure that it comes out accurate. Otherwise you could spoil the whole thing. So, alright, last one. Snug that right up there to the stopper, check it. And it falls right within that mark. So, this should be the last one. Alright, I think that'll be good enough. There's still a wee bit of cleaning in the bottom, maybe right in the corners. And I swing this iron back and forth rather than keeping it and running it this way. And in that case, in the dovetailed groove, because the bottom is wider than the top, if I kept it at 90 degrees to the groove, so to speak, or to the side of it, that iron would never get clear into the corner. So we skew that a little bit to the corner and work along that. That gets up under that overhang, so to speak, and cuts right into the corner, into the bottom. You can back cut it to score it and then go forward to cut it. So that's why you'll skew it a little bit as you go along, and that cuts clear in the very bottom, makes a nice crisp bottom in there.